Survivors. Liliana Vess. Liliana Vess stumbled through the swamp, the Caligo morass, heading vaguely toward the ruins of her childhood home. Because where else is there to go? Night had fallen. The moon was low in the sky, providing little light. Little light shone inside her mind either. Her thoughts were jumbled and jagged. A dark maze, truthfully, a disaster area. Like the ruins of 10th District Plaza on Ravnica. She remembered being on Ravnica. She remembered whispering, "Kill me now." She remembered wiping her tears away. Tears that in the moment she was grateful to have the capacity to shed. Then she remembered rejecting all those emotions as self-pity, and even now, she pushed them down. Pushed down the most human part of herself, deep, deep down into her psyche. Stay down! They'll do you no good here. No. She wouldn't pretend she left Ravnica out of guilt or shame. She left because she was under threat. That was it. Self-preservation. Pure and simple. The Gatewatch and the other so-called heroes of Ravnica were destroying Bolas's eternal enemy. And she had known those same heroes would soon come for her, as she was the most visible of Bolas's minions, if also the most coerced. They have no idea the hold Bolas had over me. They can't pretend they would have acted differently. Momentarily defiant, she kicked at a stone like an angry child. She missed, and losing her footing, hit her shoulder hard against a sagging tree. When she pushed off it, a small branch caught the hem of her dress and tore it. There, are you happy? You ruined your dress. If you needed something to cry over that. But don't you dare cry over... No, she wouldn't make excuses for herself. She didn't have to be a human being, but whatever she was, she'd at least be honest with herself. About herself. She had made a choice to kill others for Nicol Bolas in order to save her own life. It was the smart choice. No one said it was the right one. She struggled forward. Why had she come here? She distinctly remembered closing her eyes and planeswalking away from Ravnica. What she didn't remember was making any conscious decision to come to Dominaria, for reasons she could not begin to explain. She had returned to the lands of the House of Vess, where she had been born and raised, and where my life first went to the 9 hells. Bracing herself against a sagging tree that leaned out over the water, she suddenly realized she was holding Bolas's dormant spirit gem in one hand. She stared at it. It was a smooth egg-shaped stone with a silken sheen. It was silver. No, gold. She couldn't tell what color it was. It seemed to change as she turned it in her fist, and it was heavier than it looked. It had always floated or hovered between Bolas's horns. For years, she had assumed it was a simple decorative element, no more, no less. But the dragon had used it to absorb the sparks he had harvested from dying planeswalkers. The sparks I harvested for him. When the dragon disintegrated, why hadn't the gem disintegrated with him? How had she gotten it? She had absolutely no memory of picking the thing up back on Ravnica. And why would I pick it up? As a souvenir of my wonderful times with Nicol Bolas? She thought about throwing it deeper into the swamp, but didn't even seem to have the energy for that. Just drop the thing. Let it sink into the water. She didn't, of course. It had potential value, held potential power. And Liliana Vess did not throw power away. She collected it. Everyone knew that. Everyone believed that. Except maybe Beef Slab. Gideon Jura hadn't believed that. He had believed in her, or in any case, he had believed in her potential. In her potential to be more than the sum total of the self-serving, power-hungry reputation she had so actively curated, promoted, and cultivated. Of course, all that proves is that Gideon Jura is a fool. Was a fool. His memory loomed large for Liliana now. He had said, "I can't be the hero this time. But you can, Liliana." He had said, "Make it count." He had said those things while dying in order to save her life. She had always been so cynical about Gideon's faith in her. What had she ever done to earn it? What had he ever done to prove himself a good judge of character? So yes, after he was gone, after he couldn't possibly know what his death would count for or cost her, he had tried to honor his sacrifice by taking Bolus down. By successfully taking Bolus down. "That's right. I did it, Gideon. Not you. Me. Liliana Vest destroyed Nicol Bolas. Did you see me do it for you, Beef Slab? Did you see?" Now all she could see was Gideon's last horrible, beautiful smile. That and his ashes blowing away in the wind after taking her curse upon himself. She remembered the ashes, and she remembered that smile. But for the life of her, she could not remember Gideon's face. The face of a man she had come to think of as a brother. It's no different with Josu. Why can't I remember their faces? She kept moving through the slough, trying to place each foot more carefully on solid ground. There is no solid ground. That bastard Gideon and that bigger bastard Bolus have stolen the very ground beneath my feet. Who am I now? Who is Liliana Vess? She hated them. Both of them. Almost equally. Almost. And what of Jace? He had tried to kill her earlier in the day. Tried to kill her when she was still serving Bolus, and using his Eternals to kill Ravnicans, using his Eternals to harvest Planeswalker sparks for the dragon. But when it was all over, Jace had reached out to her telepathically, reached out, not with anger, but with concern. After all she had done, after she had allowed even Gideon to die in her place, she couldn't face his sympathy. His fury she could have dealt with, could have understood, but his sympathy nearly destroyed her right then and there. He had no right to offer me that. She shouted a question to the Fen. I'm making no sense at all, am I? Even her voice sounded slightly off, pinched, or maybe just unreal, false. She wasn't Liliana Vess now, at least not a Liliana Vess she recognized. She stopped and looked down at her reflection in the still water. My hair's a mess. When did I tear my dress? I actually look dirty. It wasn't like her not to maintain her appearance. She tried to cast a spell to clean herself up. The magic didn't work. She couldn't focus enough to make it work. That wasn't like her either. So, maybe I'm not Liliana Vess. Maybe I'm just a forgery. Or a Jace Beleren illusion. The dirty, ugly, wicked witch he always imagined lurked under the surface of the woman he couldn't bring himself to resist. That's what I was to him. Am to him, isn't it? And what is Jace Beleren to me? He was a man she used and manipulated for sex, for power, and to win her freedom from the demons that had held her in thrall. And that's all he was, right? Right? No. Somewhere in that deeply buried humanity, she knew that was a lie. There was a part of her that truly loved him. Assuming that's something I know how to do. Liliana laughed out loud at that. It was a cold, dead sound to her. Was love ever one of my goals? No, again. She had worked for decades to maintain her youth, to augment her power, to win her freedom. Love had never been on the agenda. The horrifically comic irony, of course, was that she now had everything she'd ever wanted, and the cost had proven too high for her to live with herself. As if there's some alternative. And just then, she tripped again. Only this time, she fell into the deep water. She went down, submerged completely. She was sinking, drowning, and a part of her welcomed it. There's your alternative. Stay here, beneath the water. Don't fight it. Let yourself go. She recognized the irony. She was half prepared to kill herself after working so desperately and killing so many others in order to preserve what she was now on the razor's edge of relinquishing. So maybe this is the end I deserve, in the swamp, within a day's walk of my father's home. But if she was to die, she wasn't going to do it face down in the muck. Her dress was soaking up the water, weighing her down. With some effort, she managed to turn herself over. The moon must have risen some. She could see a bit of its light shining down through even this silt. She closed her eyes then. She was still holding her breath, but she knew she'd have to release it soon enough. She'd involuntarily exhale air and inhale fluid, allowing her lungs to fill. She'd lose all buoyancy and sink. Maybe in a few centuries, an archaeologist would find her bones and admire their perfect proportions. Her perfect proportions. The archaeologist and her colleagues would then argue over their discovery's age at death. She would defy all scientific divination. She would remain a mystery for the ages. This appealed to her. I could live with that, she thought, and smiled. She opened her eyes one last time for one last glimpse of moonlight. Then, for just a second, she thought she saw something or someone pass above her, watching her from the shore. A figure in white? Or perhaps a figure surrounded by a white aura of invulnerability. Gideon! It's Gideon! She fought, she swam. She struggled her way to the surface to see him, to find him, to have it out with him, once and for all, to make him tell her who she was. Her dress dragged her down. She had no air. None of it mattered, not if she could see Beef Slab alive again. She surfaced, gasping for oxygen, fighting her way to shallower ground until she could stand and look around for him. And for one insane moment, she thought maybe she spotted that white figure beneath the trees. Dirty water dripped down from her sopping matted hair and into her eyes, and she blinked twice to clear them. Gideon? She whispered. But no. There's no one there. Of course there's no one there. And certainly not Gideon Jura. He's dead. You know that. You saw him disintegrate away before your eyes. He died saving you. Saving you. For this. Gideon's revenge. Well, he'd earned it. And she was up and on her feet. She might as well keep moving. So, drenched and miserable, she continued, for no good reason, on toward home, taking little notice of the gathering ravens. Teo Virata. As the guild conference continued, a tense Teo scanned 12 even tenser faces. By this time, he could identify every one of these leaders down to each guild's and titles. It was funny. He had recently spent 4 days in Oasis, and he couldn't remember the names of anyone he'd met there. But after less than a day on Aravnica, he learned an entire political geometry, and could tick off most of the names of those it comprised. The dozen world leaders, for in fact, did they not collectively rule this world, had clearly waited for the Gatewatch to move out of earshot, perhaps not having counted on Kaya actually swearing an oath to the Gatewatch just before the meeting commenced, in order to discuss a policy of assassination. Teo didn't like it. He hadn't encountered Ban or Tezzeret. and had no reason to doubt they had cooperated with the dragon and deserved a punishment, but he had seen no evidence of it either. Even Abbot Barres, who ran the monastery where Teo was raised with a burlap fist, would not punish an acolyte without proof or a confession. Maybe the guilds had both, but then why such a need for secrecy? And what about Liliana Vess? Yes, she had controlled the Eternals for Bolas, and many had died as a result, but many more would have died if she hadn't turned on Bolas, hadn't destroyed him. At the very least, she should have the opportunity to explain, shouldn't she? But the leaders of Ravnica would prefer to send Kaya. To kill her in secret? It didn't sit right. It didn't. But he'd been put in his place by Vorel when he had attempted to raise the issue. So clearly, now wasn't the time or place to cite his objections. It made a difference that he had Kaya's ear. He could, he must, talk to her about this later. Kaya, meanwhile, was pointing out a less philosophical problem. It's been hours since Vess left Ravnica, longer still for Ban, and longer than that for Tezzeret. Don't you see the problem? Vraska said, "They're not planeswalkers. They don't understand the rules." "Enlighten us," said Aurelia. Ral said, "A planeswalker can follow another planeswalker in his or her immediate wake." "But the key word," Vraska emphasized, "is immediate." Kaya nodded. "After this much time, there's simply no way for the three of us to track our targets down, assuming we even agree to the hunt." The Firemind eyed Ral. "What about Project Lightning Bug?" Teo had no idea what Project Lightning Bug was, and from the looks of nearly everyone else, he wasn't alone in that. He exchanged glances with Rat, his usual source of information about this world, but she just shrugged. Ral shook his head. "The project was keyed into the beacon, which I effectively destroyed earlier today. Ban and Vess left after that, and even if we could still recover the data on Tezzeret, it would only tell us he went to Amonkhet. We know from Samut and Karn that he planeswalked away from there hours ago. He could be anywhere in the multiverse by now." Niv Mizzet scowled and said, "This is simply a problem requiring an innovative solution." That caused Baruvo to scowl. "Spoken like a true Izzet guild mage, not the living guild pack tasked with representing all our interests." The Firemind huffed out a cloud of smoke from his nostrils. "I never promised to acquire a new vocabulary to smooth ruffled plumage. When you feel Celestia is not fairly and faithfully represented by my office, then you can complain." Without a doubt, this last statement did not smooth ruffled plumage. In fact, it launched a volley of objections from nearly all sides. Teo found he couldn't follow it all. He suddenly felt exhausted. He'd been awake for 2 straight days, one on Gobakon and one on Ravnica, days filled with more excitement, exertion, and stress than any 2 years of his life. He yawned involuntarily and barely managed to raise a hand to cover his mouth. Gan Shokta, already cross from yelling at the Firemind, barked out, "Are we boring you, boy?" No, sir. I... Rat stepped forward. "Where are your manners, father? Teo deserves better than that. You know he saved your life today. Twice." But Gan Shokta took no notice of his daughter, leaving it to Kaya to intercede. "We're all exhausted," Niv Mizzet concurred, with a glance toward the procession of planeswalkers that were working their way back toward them now. "We will reconvene in the morning." He looked to Lavinia, who nodded and said, "Meet at the Azorius Senate House 1 hour after dawn." There was a general, if somewhat begrudging murmur of agreement. The Firemind turned, to the Gorgon next. Perhaps, Queen Vraska, you should avoid relating this discussion to my predecessor. Teo had seen Vraska and Jace kiss earlier. Now the Gorgon's face revealed that she was conflicted about keeping things from a man she clearly cared so much about. Ral Zarek seemed to notice that too. Perhaps, he suggested, you'd be better served staying away from Beleren this night. How, and with whom I spend my nights, is no business of yours, Zarek. Of course not, but you don't want to give the Mind Mage the opportunity to read your thoughts. Jace wouldn't do that. Not to me. And as if to prove her point, she defiantly walked away, crossing broken pavement and passing multiple mourners and celebrants to join Jace Beleren and to take his hand. This seemed to signal an end to the conference as the quorum broke up. Kaya turned to Teo and Rat, saying, "Why don't you both come back to Orzova with me? Just for the night. We can wash, eat, sleep." Teo looked to Rat. He thought maybe she'd prefer to follow her father, who was stalking off without her. And if she decided to spend the night with the Shaktas, he thought maybe he should go with her. But Rat said, "Sounds keen," and Kaya misinterpreted his hesitancy. She put a hand on his shoulder and said, "I know you must be eager to return to Gobakon." "No hurry, really." He found himself stifling another involuntary yawn. "I get it. Too tired to think about planeswalking right now." "I don't even know how to think about planeswalking. I've only ever done it one time, and that was by accident." "No worries. I promise we'll get you home in the morning." But Teo was less concerned about getting home than he was about Rat. He was watching her when Kaya made her promise, and he could see Araithia's violet eyes lower sadly and lose a little bit of their light.